Welcome to Read This. I am your host, Alice Maria James, and today we will be speaking with author and educator Piper Huguley, the author of By Her Own Design, the historical fiction biography of Ann Lowe. Welcome, Piper. I am so excited to have you. You know how excited I am to talk about Ann Lowe, and you, of course. Thank you so much for doing this great work. But before we jump into the book, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself with our audience.
I'm Piper Huguley, and thank you so much for having me, Alice. It's truly a pleasure. I live in Atlanta. I'm a professor at Clark Atlanta, one of the HBCUs here in Atlanta, and I've written two books that are considered what we call biographical historical fiction. That is the kind of fiction that is centered around the facts of a real life person's life story. Several years ago, when I was trying to inspire my students, I taught for 13 years at Spelman before I transferred to Clark Atlanta, trying to inspire my Spelman students and see what history they knew, etc. It began to be a thought of mine that maybe this might be a way of exposing students to history that they did not know, and to get them to read more. So not just the stuff that they get assigned, but also outside reading, that it could be something of interest as well as educational.
Excellent. That is such good information and such a creative approach to getting young people to read stuff that's engaging for them. So you did explain a little bit. You did explain a little bit about historical fiction, but I am going to ask you to dive a little bit deeper into. I just want us all to understand what that is before we start talking about the book.
Back one time in the classroom where I had a student who said, historical fiction, that doesn't seem to hold hands at the same time or make sense at the same time. How could it be? It's that you're taking the facts, the sort of the known facts, or the way that I explain it, the known tent poles of someone's life, and creating the scenes around them that are plausible, that make sense in terms of connecting those tent poles of facts in terms of their stories. So it is fiction. It is a created story, but as I said, it is a created story based on some factual information. And what I call biographical historical fiction is but one, what we call subgenre of historical fiction, where like you could take any historical event and put created characters in a particular kind of situation. There's historical romance, there's historical mystery, there's historical adventure, say, all created stories, but set against a fact-based backdrop of a historical event, or in the case of my two books, a actual named person's life. Where you could, like, as you do, and one of the things that people who read the genre love to do is immediately Google to them and go read everything they can about them.
Oh, that's understandable. That was a good explanation of historical fiction. I believe most of the stuff we hear about history is historical fiction, if you ask me.
Well, there's that aspect of it. You know, it really, I believe, belongs on a continuum of, you know, this whole notion of what is history versus this created historical fiction type stuff. You know, and there are scholars who still are struggling with that, right? The thought of somehow of historical fiction as being less credible is an interesting one when you consider the whole aspect of what we call history as being so hardcore fact is always informed by who's writing it, who are they writing it for, what facts are included, and indeed, in the case of Black women's lives, what gets left out, what is not told. All of that history is informed by that. But
and I hear people talk about how the dinosaurs lived 1,000,000 years ago. And they say it with such certainty and such positiveness that it's undeniable. This is what happens. I'm like, okay, if you say so, you were there. So
there's evidence. So right, so we know what they look like and how they sounded. Even it's like,
yeah, how they sounded, what they ate. We know so much. So I love the fact that you have taken the initiative to start telling our stories with the information that you have available to you. You have now at least put life to these people, to these characters, and that makes me so happy. And Ann Lowe has special meaning to me because I studied fashion design since high school. I was a seamstress in a bridal shop in high school. And my high school fashion design teacher took us to see the Black Fashion Museum in Harlem when it opened. And that was all about Ann Lowe. And it really shaped my career choice and my moving to New York. And for the last 40 years, I've never really seen anything or one or two brief articles about her. Mm-hmm. So to see a whole book written about her story, you don't know. I was jumping. I was so excited. And so my first question to you is, what inspired you to write about this amazing woman?
Well, I've always been a Kennedy aficionado. I have a little sub-expertise, if you will, in terms of presidents and first ladies. So there was that particular aspect. And I, of course, as a Black person, always wanted to know who were the Black people in Kennedy's orbit. Sort of the thing that people may not know. John JFK hired the first Black Secret Service agent. For instance, he also ensured that there was a Black astronaut, even though he did not get to go up into space, for reasons that they put forward in terms of why he couldn't go up. And for Jackie, one of the things that I had always known in the back of my mind was that the woman who designed her wedding gown was a Black woman. So I'd always known that, but it was not anything that, given any other biography of her that you go look at, read, she's very briefly mentioned, or even sometimes, and this is the kind of thing we're talking about when you're looking at what's considered to be a biography, a factual compilation of someone's life. Completely gloss over or omitted or not mentioned. The most famous of her biographies, Jackie O by Kitty Kelly, calls her the family seamstress. There's no name in that book. It's just that she was the family seamstress. And to call Ann Lowe a family seamstress, the family seamstress, is wrong. It's not just, it's some other way of referring to her. It's incorrect, right? Which again points to this whole aspect that we've been talking about, history being written in a certain way, who's doing it, what's informed by all of a sudden. So knowing that, I had come across a tweet one day on that platform formerly known as Twitter. And my editor, the woman who's my editor, would sometimes tweet out an article or a link saying, who will write this novel for me? A friend of mine had gotten a contract with her when she had done that writing about the 6888. which is the all-Black female troops from World War II, the Black women who went over and fixed the mail. Because the dudes who were over there doing it weren't doing it right. So she wanted to see a novel about that. Now the AAA is all over the place in terms of how they've been rediscovered in terms of their contributions in fixing the mail that Black women did. So I paid attention. I was like, okay, well, since my friend got a contract, maybe sis can get a little something in terms of that. So I read the article and that ignited, okay, yes, Ann Lowe, I do remember her. Okay. Read some other things and looked deeper into her. When I did, I was like, oh my gosh, that is a novel. So immediately I wrote much of what ended up being the prologue, which I was prior to this blog until this moment, and I became prologue.
Never say never.
Exactly. This is to point that out. Never say never. Because I'm nerd enough to know that the day that she died was the day after Charles and Diana got engaged, so that I knew, it was like, oh, if she was awake and aware, and the way she chased down commission, she'd probably be like, somebody going to get that commission. She'd be thinking about that. So I had this scene in my mind of her on her deathbed thinking about that. Sent it to my agent and said, tell Tessa I'm on this. Do not let anybody else smear it. And that's how I got the contract for the book.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
Social media can pay off.
So it sounds like the research made you a fan?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. It made me a fan of her. Mm-hmm. Like I said, in terms of looking at the events of her life, once I knew more about them, the strength, the resilience, the determination, the follow through, all of that, it just immediately became clear to me. The trajectory of her accomplishment pointed to what I consider to be a sub-theme of the book. If anyone has a dream, this is what it takes to accomplish it. And so, I was immediately enthralled with her work. I mean, everybody looking at Jackie's Dress is her most famous commission, which in my perspective is not even her best work in terms of the things that she managed to pull off and do. But yeah, the fact of the matter is that were I not a Kennedy aficionado to have had the slightest bit of exposure to her, I wouldn't know. She's not, my parents were fashionistas, but she was not someone whose name was mentioned in my home as someone you would wear or whatever. It's probably because by that time her fortunes had declined. And you have Dior and Yves Saint Laurent, Halston, whatever. You don't have House of Lowe, like we should have.
Right.
But no.
And it's not because for lack of trying, but no, I took fashion design in high school, and I took fashion design in college. And Ann Lowe's name only came up because my high school fashion design teacher saw this museum open and had a group of brown girls, and she was wise enough to recognize representation matters. And she took us to this place to see this, that to this day, I still don't believe anyone teaches about what she's done. So there's no way that this comes across in your family. I followed, growing up, I followed the Ebony Fashion Fair and those things. And that had never, ever, her acknowledgement had never, ever come across. So this is where my excitement about even your research. Can you give us a glimpse into what does that look like to write historical fiction?
when writing about a marginalized subject, the subjects who are left out of the historical record, that those 10 poles of fact don't exist in the same way as if they would say if I were interested in writing a historical fiction novel. I don't know, I'm just picking out just some random white dude from history. Like if I were to write a historical fiction novel, say about JFK, there would be so much. There would be an avalanche of stuff there, right? In terms of writing that. And that's not there for her. From the beginning of her life, it's not there for her. But I knew that, and serendipitously, I knew that with Ann Lowe, because when she's born in Alabama, small town Clayton, Alabama, where she's born is 2 counties over from my paternal great grandmother. So I already knew to a certain extent what her early years might look like because of family history. Also, serendipitously, I knew that 2 counties over from where Ann Lowe was born, Zora Neale Hurston was born. And she's someone who I'd worked on in my dissertation. So those 2 factors enabled me to get a better sense of what her early years would look like and being able to inscribe them in fiction for things that, like, as I'm saying, in terms of the primary records that don't exist, like a birth certificate, which would not exist for a young Black girl born in that space in that time because of Jim Crow Alabama racism. So, for instance, that kind of thing, in terms of that, there are other resources, say, that you look at that life alongside of that particular life to begin to think about what someone's early years look like. And it just so happens that I'm a Zora Neale Hurston scholar and that my paternal great-grandmother had already informed some of that in me, which is why I think it's important for what the literary world, the publishing world, had been calling own voices authors to write these things, to write these life stories or whatever, because we can bring something else to the page that someone who is not of the same background can. So that was one place in which, but because she's Ann Lowe, there were other things that were available for her life that wouldn't be available for another Black woman of that time and place. Margaret Powell, who was a textile scholar, had been someone who had been working on writing the scholarly biography that Ann Lowe deserves. And her notes and ultimately her thesis when she graduated from Corcoran School of Art was something that she had pulled together the things that did exist in one place that I could go take a look at and think about what would be those 10 poles of fact of things that would be included in a novel, what wouldn't be included, all of that other kind of things, which is why the book is dedicated to her, because she paved the way, Black female textile scholar, paved the way for that to be able to, for me to be able to look at those sources and to begin to think about structuring a story, for instance. So, that's a benefit that's there. But for other subjects, sometimes those things aren't there. And it is quite piecemeal due to the fact that our lives don't get recorded.
And even when they have been written or documented, as many times as our communities have been burned out, flooded out, just demolished, I feel that a lot of our records, even if we were to keep them, were constantly being erased. Yeah. And for me, that's why I feel strongly that we have to have our information in multiple places these days. So if one place gets terminated there. You'll find us someplace else. So we jump in and I jump into the book, and her early years were, oh my God, they were heart-wrenching. I honestly wasn't sure I could get through some of the early years. Can I ask what inspired that path? Knowledge, or is this, as you said, the combination of knowing what life was like at that time for Black women that took you down that road?
Do you mean her beginnings?
Her young marriage and
yeah, that's part of it, in terms of those aspects, those, like you're saying, heart-rending, horrific aspects of life of a young Black girl at that particular point in time who doesn't have a father. The whole aspect of life for a young Black girl at that time, as well as sort of the notion that somehow, and this was an ongoing theme of Zora Neale Hurston's life, her father constantly impressing upon her what a waste she was in terms of her taking up air, breath, food, because girls were not of any use, right? In terms of her this constant aspect in terms of that. And so this attitude or this notion of somehow offloading your useless girl somehow into being somebody else's burden, if you will. Child marriage was one of those methods by which that kind of thing would happen. And Margaret's research, coupled ultimately with what the family also acknowledges to be true, meant that, again, historical fiction is this whole notion of putting together the things that are plausible in nature, right? In terms of that. And that was one of those things that was like, what would cause her to be offloaded in this particular circumstance, looking at that 1910 census record, which is one of the things that does exist, right? And how weird it was. Just like looking at that and staring at it and trying to like transcribe or think about and the notion that she started or was in such a place for the beginning of her life, and was determined and strong enough and believed in herself enough from the beginning, is part of the story.
yes.
The fact that both her mother and her grandmother, even after the fact of her horrific origins or whatever, continued to pour into her and believe her,
yes.
to see her as somehow as being the best of them, right?
Yes.
This notion of, even as these women had a sewing tradition that went back several generations into enslavement, all of that pointed to the fact that this girl had a belief, or she had some seed of belief in herself that permitted her to escape that circumstance. Yes. Great.
I was exposed to her 40 years ago. And in the last 40 years, I think I've only seen one or two things written about her. And one thing that I saw written about her just made my blood boil. On one hand, I was so excited that someone had written about her. But then on the other hand, it was so skewed and so biased. And the part that bothered me the most was that statement of fact that someone wrote where they said, oh, she claims that she made 1,000 dresses a year, but in Paris, they only made 300. So this seems to be an exaggeration. And being of a person of color, knowing that no matter what we do, we have to do twice as much or even three times as much. One, because we're not going to get paid as much. And two, because it is expected of us.
Yeah.
That you cannot look through your lens of what someone that's going to all the local functions and these different things are doing and saying that because they live this way, that means this person lived that way too. And I got so angry with that comment. And then the other comment in the article that upset me was the way they described her husband, because he wanted to do something that wasn't manual labor. He wanted to do something that was a little bit more refined, but because he was this big husky Black man, it somehow the fact that he had 13 different hustles didn't matter because he didn't want to do manual labor. So when you read things that are put on you from someone else's perspective that don't they don't go through the stresses and the strife, and are they not confronted with the same things that you're confronted with, it's almost a disservice to have them write about the experience.
Or they have had that, what you just referred to, Alice, that same saying, we have to do twice as much to get half as far. In your head, time and time again, where, whether it's your family saying it or society saying it or Black society saying it, whatever, that person probably never heard of that saying. So, no. And that's exactly just like what you're talking about, the benefit of having someone's own voices look at a statement or, to think of fact and interpret it in a completely different way.
Exactly.
In terms of that. And the fact that I think you're referring to, because I read that thing 2 times when it first came out, and I ain't never looked at it since. So give me, I don't even think that I listed it on, because one of the things in historical fiction that people who like the genre like the bibliography at the end, the resources at the end, so they immediately know where to go look. I don't think I listed it. I was in the same space as you with it in terms of that. But the nature of her.
One of the things that you really put forth in the book and in driving home the point that Black women, if Black people were less than, then Black women were less than being Black people, which it really helped you see how actually hard she had to struggle because if you were at the bottom of the barrel as a Black person, a Black woman, she's now under the barrel. She's not even climbing out of the barrel. She has to kind of get through the bottom of the barrel to even start to move forward. And I think that was very insightful, because if you don't really understand how extremely rough it was for Black women, then you don't appreciate what she accomplished.
Yes. That is completely true. And I think, in large part due to my study in terms of the literature of other Black women, that gave me some insight into that, how that needed to be imparted as part of that story. And so, just even when other Black women writers are writing about their own backgrounds, one of the texts that really informs this work is Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Garden. In Search of Our Mother's Gardens is Walker's compilation of her essays over the years that talks about her own way in which she saw the lives of Black women, etc. But in one of the essays that she writes about her own mother was when her mother had gotten some kind of charity box or something like that. And there was a dress in the charity box that her mother then applied her sewing skill toward making and recreating it to fit her, to, making it over for herself to make it look like as if it were new or something like that. And then she went to the store. And when she went to the store, a white woman asked her in this kind of rude voice, like, where she got that dress from, because it was clearly this whole aspect about it was something that was too good for her to have on, which pointed to, for me, that moment, that tension, that moment when Ann Lowe is in the department store in Dothan, Alabama. And one of the things about Ann Lowe always was about not dressing in a showy or obvious way. She was not the kind of person who was like, oh, let me just put on the kind of thing I know I can make so I could be a walking billboard for myself. No, she was always somebody who would be tastefully dressed, but dressed not to impress, right? Which made me nervous, at that point when I was like first learning about her, thinking like, oh my gosh, what if this white woman like says what you're wearing is too good? You have to go somewhere and take that off kind of circumstance. But fortunately, in Ann's case, it was a matter of her noticing how well made. The reason why I wrote the book was sort of to say is like to enable some people to be able to see. You have no idea what anybody can do or not do or whatever when they enter your life, your world, your existence. And making these judgments based on what someone looks like is foolish.
Yeah. I the part of your book that really spoke volumes to that was that the way you took us through that portion of the story with her going there to be taught, but actually teaching.
Yes.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yeah. And the fact that nobody going into this, nobody valued what she could possibly bring to the table until she was teaching them better ways or how to actually do it right. Because theory is one thing, practicality is totally different.
Yes.
So the fact that you did a marvelous job with that depiction and that revelation that she brought to the class. And what was even more thoughtful about it is that even with all of that, even with her teaching and with all her expertise, they still never welcomed her into the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They never welcomed her into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just, as I said, I am so excited about this book, about giving her recognition for what she was able to accomplish in such challenging circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say it is that you would want your readers to take away from this book?
Yes, was I'm saying her life is such a revelation. As I said, when I first, like I said, we started gathering those factual tentpoles about her life, that's what struck me at first was the whole aspect of the determination that she had to see herself through. All the way to, I don't recall if we had spoken about if you had seen the only recorded interview of her on the Mike Douglas show in 1964, which is on YouTube.
I have to go back and find this.
You must see it. Yes, we're not talking. You have to see it. It's an interesting artifact in several ways. First of all, it is an artifact, not just that it captures. And the funny thing about it is a little to see the certain things that I captured about her that I knew were true. Like she's every inch the Southern lady, was just so proper, etc. But certain other things that I also know, the notion of her eyes behind her glasses at this point late in her life, where it's clear that her sight is impacted. But even she tells the story about the school, right? And in her gracious but slightly shady way says it doesn't exist anymore, is very satisfying, right? But also to say the way in which she navigates that interview, and in terms of still points to her resilience, her strength, her determination. So that's what we want anybody to take from the book would be that. This is what, if you are an artist, you are creative, it's this kind of path that you have to walk to realize your dream and not give up on it. So she teaches us that.
Well, you did a marvelous job of giving us some insight into her world, her resilience, her tenacity, because it takes tenacity too, to stand your ground when you're.
The whole question of the economic piece, which is part of what you'll see in the Mike Douglas interview in terms of that really is very interestingly continues. We see, Taraji Henson, being paid 10% of what Brad Pitt was paid and Benjamin Button. This kind of the piece that continues in Black women's lives. Her whole notion of like, if people were going to pay me what I'm worth, what these custom bespoke works of art, right? This is why the Winterthur's having an exhibit in art museum place. These are works of art. This was creating wearable art in terms of her fashion design. That if they were really going to pay her what she was worth, the money issues that constantly besiege her, like you're saying, in terms of having to make 2 and 3 times gowns, or as she was known to do, that she could make one of those gowns in a day, right? And how many days of the year are there? So all of that she wouldn't have had those issues. It's a constant issue,
and it hasn't changed. It has not changed. It has not changed. It has not changed. But I thank you so much for bringing light to this. I am so excited that you shared Ann Lowe. And I don't know if you can see my glow, but I'm so excited. And I am going to be out here promoting this with you because she is someone that should be known. She should not be swept under the rug. And as I said, as somebody that has been in the fashion industry, studied fashion, and for her name not to be up there with the whoever's, I don't even care.
The fact is that, the House of Lowe.
I totally agree. And I say thank you. Thank you so much for your time and so much for taking this project on. It needs to be a movie. It needs to be a special. It needs to be something. And let's just put it out in the atmosphere so someone else can see this and make it happen.
Yes, absolutely. But it's an honor for me to be a conduit for, like I said, getting this amazing woman's story out there. So thank you for doing it, for helping to disseminate.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And you have a new book coming out in 2024. I know we're talking about Ann Lowe, but if you want to give a brief shout out to your next project, go for it.
American Daughters is the story of the secret interracial friendship between the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, Alice Roosevelt, and Portia Washington, the daughter of Booker T. Washington. What I like to call how the Black princess and the white princess of America were friends for 3/4 of the 20th century, from 1901. So American Daughters comes out on April 2nd.
Okay, well, we will look forward to that, and maybe I could get you back on to talk about American Daughters as well. I hope you enjoyed our show and the informative discussion with author Piper Huguley about Ann Lowe's life and legacy. And please go out and pick up a copy of her book by her own design, and look out for or even pre-order her new book, American Daughters. Until next time, this is Alice James. Read this, Author's Corner. Continue to read and grow and be enlightened.